Hi everybody, welcome back to my channel. Thank you so much for tuning in today. If you wouldn't mind clicking that like button and subscribing to my channel, that would be great. As a final warning, there will be spoilers in this video for the One Piece television series and anime. If you have not watched either of them, please go watch either the live action or the anime. I promise it's worth your while. Now let's get into today's topic. The Great Demon, the Pirate Hunter, Roronoa Zoro, and Luffy's first mate. What on earth are we going to be talking about in regards to this man, this character? Well, there's a couple things. We gotta remember that yesterday we talked about autism spectrum disorder and the different effects that can have on the environment others perceive themselves in. Zoro is an incredibly complex character with a multitude of distraught background where he has been traumatized. In this video, we will be discussing loss and the traumatizing things that come with it. Before we get into it too much further, I know I already gave the spoiler warning, but the thing I wanted to mention currently is that if you are currently experiencing grief or suicidal ideation or any of those things, please seek out a mental health professional. We love you and we need you in this world, so please seek out those counseling services. Now, let's get back to the video. So, let's talk about grief for a minute. When we lose someone or something, there's often a tendency to dwell on things that we could have done differently. The other thing that we tend to do is we tend to hyperfixate. Our obsessions become our passions. Now, it's easier when the person we lost or the thing that we lost is closely in line with what we enjoy doing, right? And what our goals or our ambitions already are. If we don't have that luxury, oftentimes we find ourselves going to a very dark place. Now, with all of that being said, the things that I really want to talk about in today's video is mostly about what we can expect and learn from loss, especially from Zoro. Loss is a powerful tool because it often dictates what we do next. Zoro lost somebody very, very close to him as a child, his best friend, and he promised to her that one of them would become the best man or woman to use a sword who ever lived. So when we're dealing with loss and grief, the one thing we need to remember is that we're not defined by our experiences. We are defined by what we gain from those experiences. In the third episode of the live action series, we learn that Vice Admiral Garp, who is Luffy's grandfather, has had some dealings with pirates in the past that he was either close to or had friendships with. But I think the one thing that he says in that episode, which I'm going to quote, is that we are not defined by our experiences. It's what we gain from them that matters. He follows that up by saying, you learned and you survived. We can look at that from a couple different perspectives, right? We can look at woe is me and be very self-conscious about how others interact with us due to fear, embarrassment, shame, guilt, those types of feelings, or we can learn from that experience. Loss is a great teacher because, as mentioned earlier, it propels us to do something different. If we dwell on our loss and our grief, we have this perpetual grief cycle that eats at us and it makes us become a very angry person, right? And so the cool thing about this example is that we learn that all of these people are connected, and more so not because of their similarities with each other, but because of their different experiences, and where one lacks, the other picks up. Luffy doesn't really get those social areas of conversation or those relationships that he works on building with others. However, Zoro does. Zoro is obsessed with fulfilling his best friend's dream. It happens to be his dream and goal, but it's almost as though he's living through her eyes instead of living his own life and becoming his own person. The hard thing with loss and grief is that, what would this person do? Oh, this person would have done this. Oh, this person would have done this. It's not what Nate would have done. It's not what I would have done. You know, it becomes an outward focus versus an inward focus. If we really want to find that closure and that momentum to do something constructive with our lives, we really need to focus on not only the positive that person left on us, those positive feelings and emotions and those lessons we learned from that person, but the other thing we need to take with us is that important thing, which is love and compassion, and spread it. Now, when we spread our emotions, one of the things that ends up happening is that because everyone is so unique, everyone is so different, we all have these really cool opportunities to build each other up. I look at Luffy's grandfather, for example, someone who saw, okay, my grandson is really talented, he's really strong, he's really gifted, yet he never fit the mold of a Marine. He didn't fit that structure. And as we talked about yesterday, the reason why he didn't fit that structure is because he's autistic. He's on the spectrum. He didn't create his structure. It was given to him by someone else, a different society, a different pattern of behavior. When you're a pirate in this world, you have the freedom to choose. Luffy is a really good person, and he wants to share that love for life, freedom, and adventure with everybody he comes in contact with. And as we see in the anime, we see that, you know, he has encountered Buggy the Clown, and he keeps messing up his name and different shenanigans take place, but the one thing that ends up coming out of that is that the entire town wants to rally behind Luffy because he's such a good person and he helped the town get out of the hellscape they were in. When we look at grief and loss, these villagers could have easily turned their backs on these new pirates, right? They could have said, oh, you guys are just like them, but instead they saw the good that had been done and what they were trying to do. And they offered them food as they departed. We can use that as another lesson, right? If we experience grief and loss, can we reject someone's offering someone's help? Absolutely. Because in our mind, you know, that makes us stronger by rejecting other people's help. Closure doesn't come just because you said, I feel good about the outcome of this situation. Closure comes when you could admit that that objective, that portion of your life is complete. Another good example of this is that in the workplace, right, someone experiences loss, whether it's a loss of employment, loss of a loved one, loss of patience or self-worth. All of these things kind of have their own yin and yang where you have to really find a way to make balance out of all of this. But one of the things that we can take away is that as you're going through the grieving process in what you've lost, there's going to be that anger, there's going to be that bitterness, but there's always a chance to be happy at the end. And I really look at, you know, for example, I was laid off from my employer. Now, I could look at that two different ways. I can say, okay, woe is me, and I was discriminated against for whatever reason, and I am going to push back. Or I can move forward, and I can say, you know what, I did everything in my power, I did what I could, and it's time for me to move on. And there's wonderful things that happen along the way, and if you don't take a step back to see all of the wonderful things around you, chances are you get lost in that mindset of fear and despair. I love this story and I love these characters, and I know I've said this a lot, but one of the things I wanted to share is that as all of these characters get together, they really don't want to let each other go. Another good example is Nami. We're going to be talking about her tomorrow. She looks at the entire situation and sees, Luffy and Zoro. Zoro fights one of the Great Lords and loses. The Great Pirate Lord doesn't want to kill him because he feels like Zoro has much, much more to learn, and he is a wonderful swordsman, and Zoro is going to have another opportunity at some point to fight this Great Pirate Lord. Now, we need to look at this a little bit deeper. Nami starts the process of running away. She is going to leave Batier and go to a island where she's from, right? And she's going to abandon all of her friends and everything she's accomplished there. But she doesn't. She wants to go be with her best friends, even if that friend dies, because she can't live with herself not being there for him. That is a powerful sign of affection. When you have that much love for somebody and that much compassion for somebody, you really have an amazing opportunity whether that person succeeds or fails, because you're surrounded by people who love you. She struggles so much and wants the fighting to stop because she feels like, I can't lose anyone else. She never felt like she could have friends. She lost her own mother. So why would you put yourself in a situation where that compacts on top of each other time and time again? You're not going to do that. You're going to put yourself in a situation where you can try and seek that closure. She, unfortunately, sought out the path of vengeance. And when you try and get revenge for a transgression, you end up becoming very angry. You lose the one thing that made you, you. Fortunately for Zoro, he never lost that, because his interest was his best friend's interest, to become the best swordsman or woman to ever live. And that's where we're going to take this, and that's where we're going to expound on these. Now, I'm excited for tomorrow's conversation because I feel like tomorrow's conversation is going to take a lot more effort to put together, and it's going to carry on some of the attributes and some of the other discussions we've had between today and yesterday. And so, with all of that being said, I really want to emphasize one final point before closing this out, and that is strength comes from not endurance. It comes from being able to admit your faults, your shortcomings, and be vulnerable. When you're vulnerable and you're able to have those honest conversations, it doesn't matter if you're at work or if you're at home. Let's bring autism up again, because that's something I can speak about from a first-hand point of view. Sure, I don't have to tell anybody that I'm autistic. That doesn't hurt anybody, right? The only person that hurts is me. Now, why does that hurt me? One, for example, one of the things that autistic people have to deal with is hyperfixation. Now, hyperfixation is great for productivity. However, when you work in dangerous environments, that can lead to very dangerous places, right? Because you could work in unsafe spaces. You take matters into your own hands, and then you end up causing pain, harm, or damage to someone, something, or others. Or even yourself, And I know those are all kind of, repetitive remarks from yesterday, but the one thing I do want to emphasize here is that when you deal with loss, you really have only two choices, and that's, what did you learn from this experience? Yes, you should honor that old part of yourself, that person you lost, that item you lost, anything, because grieving isn't just about losing people. It's about losing your old self. Think of a butterfly, right? It's a caterpillar. Fuzzy, weird, kind of creepy, but eventually it turns into a beautiful butterfly. And that is the next stage. And that's where we want to be. We want to be able to find the connection with others that can help us get to that point. there's so many wonderful people in our lives that help us get there. The only question becomes, who do you surround yourself with? There are a couple resources that I will put down in the description for this video. Please check them out if you are struggling with any of these topics. But the cool thing, like I said about grief, is that it always gets worse before it gets better. But when it does get better, you won't even be able to recognize your old self, and it is empowering, it's strengthening, and it's encouraging. So with all that being said, we're going to end on a high note here. Thank you so much for watching. If you wouldn't mind liking this video, subscribing, sharing this with your friends. And until next time, this has been my Coffee Corner, and I'll catch you on the next one.